Welcome to the Jason de Sousa Show. Join us as we explore the evolving urban landscape, uncovering the trends, stories, and innovations shaping our cities. Thanks for watching and enjoy today's episode.
Alice Drew, welcome to the Jason de Sousa Show.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so happy to be here.
I can't believe it. We are actually doing this. We're
it only
sat
took
down
months.
in one room together. Now, it's so good to have you on because I've been keen to chat to you for ages because you and I always have really interesting conversations when we catch up in the city, in between meetings and corridors. And I thought, what better way of actually sort of formally having that conversation than on a podcast?
Amazing.
So welcome. And particularly now, I just love the idea of talking about cities and what's going on in them. I just came back. Part of the reason why I'm so late is I was, in Bankstown, and I was driving back, and one of the best views of Sydney is coming over the Anzac Bridge, coming through City West Link over the Anzac Bridge, and seeing the city of Sydney from that western side has got to be one of the most remarkable views. And it sort of says to me how lucky we are to be living in this particular city. And of course, you do a lot of city and workplace thinking for a living. So what a great entryway into talking to you.
Amazing. So you're saying that the view is what made you late?
It's inspired me to have a very interesting conversation with you right now.
Wonderful.
So what have you been up to? What is going on with you? You are a workplace expert, but you're far more than that. What's keeping you busy?
So many things. I think it's been such an interesting few years lately. One of the big things that we did this year is we've been doing a whole lot of research looking at what is changing in the world that may influence change in the design space. So whether it's in cities or big precincts or places of work, we've been really trying to understand what are the key drivers that are going to influence those changes. And those drivers are not necessarily what we think we like the look of or anything like that. It's more what's happening in business and society, what are the macro trends that are going to shape the future. So we recently launched a paper in collaboration with TEDx Sydney, and that was a really amazing experience. So we had a look at...
And you did one of those TED Talk things, right? Did you have the whole microphone thing? Yeah? And did you wave your arms around a lot?
I waved my arms a lot. Cool. It was really good. They told me to wave my arms even more.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Because whenever I watch those TEDx episodes, right? Yeah. Unlike my show, which is pretty relaxed and, we don't do a lot of arm waving on this show. It seems to me everyone's always walking around all the time.
Yeah.
And they're always waving their arms around a lot.
Yeah, they told me to take up more space.
What does that even mean, take up more space?
Like own the stage.
Okay. Anyway, I distracted you. What did you actually say in this amazing show? While you were taking up space, what did you actually say?
So what I said at the event was a really tiny little sliver of the work that we've been doing. And the event was about a new age of work. So the issue that we posed at the event was, how would you feel if I was to tell you you're going to be working an extra 20 years beyond your current expected age of retirement? Because we've been obsessed with what we're doing to create workplaces and a great life for Generation Z. But while we've been busily doing all of that, there's been a lot happening at the other end of the workforce as well. So the number of people in the workforce aged over 65 has tripled in the last decade. We know that with changes in the population, we are going to be working longer, because we are living longer, because of innovations and advancements in healthcare and our views on longevity these days. So it was really about how do we start to set up for that future? What does the future look like?
So what does working longer mean? Because that's interesting to me, right? Because 65, which is the traditional, well, at least in my generation, our generation, was considered already young. And now I would suggest to you that 65 is even younger than what it was 10 years ago, right? So, but the retirement age hasn't really moved in most legislative areas. I mean, France is on the brink of another governmental collapse because they keep thinking about moving the retirement age, and the French retire at 15 or something. So, for them, it's pretty tough. But no, seriously, I think their age is 64 or 5, might be 64. Yeah. Don't quote me, but it's somewhere around there. What does working longer actually mean?
So, a couple of things before I get there. if you look back to the year 2000, the average age of retirement in Australia in 2000 was 53.3 years.
The average
Age of retirement, yes. So not the legislated age or anything like that, but the average age of retirement. And when you fast forward 25 years to today, the average age of retirement is 65.5.
Okay, so it has gone up already.
It has gone up. The average age of actual retirement has gone up. And so over the last 25 years, we've added 12 years to our careers. So if we keep doing that at the same rate for the next 25 years as we have for the last 25 years, we could be working into our 80s.
And what's wrong with that?
So there's not necessarily anything wrong with that per se overall, but people obviously have really big feelings about whether they can see themselves working, whether they want to work longer. And the reality is some people will work because financially they have to.
Yeah, right, and that's the difference, isn't it? It's a difference between choosing to work for whatever you want, whether it's in a career or some other, or part-time or, and this is a very white-collar perspective, right? You do some kind of advisory, whatever, versus financially, if you do not work, then the world stops. Like that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And there's a vast difference between the types of work that people do because they have to versus because they want to in some parts of the economy as well. So one of the things that we did was we did a survey across many different industries and many different countries. And so there were hundreds and hundreds of respondents. We'd love more respondents, but of the ones that we interviewed and spoke to, there was about a 50-50 split as to whether people felt positively or negatively about working longer. And when we're talking about working longer, we were posing significantly longer, not just a couple of extra years. But what was interesting to me was that as people got towards their retirement age, they were more likely to see working longer in a positive light.
Yeah. Yep.
So while you're in the trenches and you're working hard and you're raising a family and you're doing all of the things at once, it's really hard and people are like, can this stop
Don't
now?
we both know it, right?
Oh,
I mean, our kids are about the same age, and I was having this conversation with my wife last night. Lily's in that wonderful honeymoon phase. Her and her husband just got married. I met with them the other day. They're in love with each other. It's all beautiful. Life is great. I'm like, yeah, wait. I told her poor husband that it's all downhill from here. He looked at me. He's like, "Are you being serious?" I'm like, "No, I'm not being serious." Anyway, I digress. But yes, you're right. Like this. What do they call it? There's a particular period of time where this child rearing is where we love our children intensely, but it is chaos. Right, and if I have to step on another piece of Lego again, which I did this
shoes for
morning,
that.
well, maybe I should start wearing
There
them.
are Lego slippers.
Are
yeah,
there?
I think that's a great
You're
gift
kidding.
for you, Jason.
There's
No,
Lego.
I'm serious.
Oh, gosh. Today's a big day for me actually because it's my son, Joshy, who's 5, his last day of preschool.
Oh, wow.
Very last day, and that's it. He's going, and we've been at that preschool for, it's basically 9 years.
Wow.
Between the 3
youngest?
kids. He's the youngest.
So this is your last day of preschool.
This is our last
as well.
day of preschool. Last day of that little happy place, Peter Rabbit Preschool, which is one of the most beautiful places, and it has just beautiful teachers and everything about it is wonderful, and it's such a happy place. And you think, I'm actually a little bit sad, right? That now he's going into big school. He wore his uniform today to preschool because it's part of the graduation.
They love it.
It's so fun. How old are your kids?
10 and 7.
Yeah, right. So you're well beyond this point, right? Well,
yeah. But I have to say, I've always felt the nostalgia leaving things, like that sadness, and I've always wanted to hold on to those times. But then I'm hearing you talk about it, and I'm like, I'm really glad I've moved past that. It's like when you love a little baby, and you're like, never grow up. I love this baby, and then you're really happy you don't have to change.
I told my 9-year-old when she was 3 that you're not supposed to grow up. She said she promised me that she wouldn't. And then I remind her now, you're 9 now, but you promised me you wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, my husband promised me in his wedding vows he'll never die. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's nice. All I promised on my wedding was, seriously, and this is a major digression, but all I promised my now wife, who's very tolerant of me, I said 2 things. I said, and I gave Ivan the same advice actually, which is all you need to do is promise to turn up, which I did, and say yes. I did both of those things, so I consider myself having met my expectations. Anyway, we digress. So back to work.
So much. Yeah.
Back to work. So you're absolutely right. This particular period of time for particularly parents of young children, when you look forward, you think, my goodness, is this going to last forever? This is a pretty exhausting period of time. I want to return to that issue for a second, but I just want to finish this part we're talking about, which is, well, what does retirement actually look like? Because the question of retirement, I think 50 years ago isn't golf going to be great? I'm going to buy a boat. This is a very male perspective, I suppose, but bear with me. Whereas I talk to older people now who have gone into executive careers or gone into other careers, and one thing they say is, my friends who have stopped altogether have always regretted it, because they just, there's only so much golf you can play. There's only so much art you can paint. There's only so much boating you can do. Whereas by staying in the market, by doing things, by not doing every day, you can travel, you can do whatever you want, but still keeping busy, keeping providing advice to younger executives or younger people or whatever is the right way to go. Well, is that what you're seeing in this sort of analysis?
Yeah. So I mentioned before that as people got closer to their expected retirement age, they were more likely to see benefit in a longer career or continuing working. And the reasons they cited for that were they believed that staying working longer meant they would have a longer lifespan, they would stay sharper of mind, and what was really important to them was having this ability to continue to give back to the world. So staying relevant in the world, staying engaged with what's happening in society, that was really important to a lot of people that we spoke to. And even people who didn't see the benefit in working longer, what I found really interesting is that they said that they would still work if they enjoyed their jobs.
If they enjoyed
their
jobs,
careers.
yeah. And that's the
or
problem.
if they were doing something that was on their own terms, whether it was flexible working, volunteer work, doing things that were kind of personal interest endeavours, looking after their grandchildren. I mean, that is still work.
Oh, entirely, right.
That is still a whole, and I don't think people think of that as work, but it's still adding immense value to society and to other people as well.
I mean, that's right.
So work is
the whole care economy is an interesting debate, which we might come back to as well. But I agree, older people caring for grandkids, particularly now where both parents are working and both parents are in busy careers, in whatever career that might be. What happens if there's no grant? I mean, the government has just come out with a policy position that says 3 days of childcare for anyone earning under 500K as a household. And the reason why they're doing that is to try and boost productivity, to let people go to work. And they've extended it actually even for people who are not working. Their proposal is to have no activity test on either parent, whichever is the stay-at-home parent, so they can encourage work. And this was as a result of a productivity commission decision. But actually there's a whole debate around, well, does that actually improve the care for children in that arrangement? It helps increase workforce productivity, but does it actually improve the care for children? It's a tough debating point, right?
It's a very tough one. I think people have very different opinions of whether sending a child to childcare rather than being with a parent is a good thing. And at the end of the day, I mean, being a working parent myself, a lot of the conversations I have with particularly with other mums, is about the working mum guilt that you have. But at the end of the day, that's really a zero-sum game. It doesn't help you if you feel bad about it. It doesn't help your children if you're constantly feeling bad about it or trying to make up for it or apologise for it.
I totally agree. I actually gave that talk once, I don't know if you were there, with the graduates at Lendlease, where I said to them, and I don't know what mood I was in when I said this, but I got in trouble because I said, look, I said to the boys, you guys are in big trouble. You're here, great, but you're in big trouble, because the girls are working harder, they're smarter than you are, and they want to get ahead faster than you. So you know, have fun at your rugby game, but, you know, pick up the pace or you guys are toast. It was a little bit more diplomatic than this. But I did say to the girls, I said, one of the biggest problems, you know, you're going to face is working mum guilt. If you have children, you will have, I'm married to one of you, something similar to what you will be when you're older, and working mum guilt. And you shouldn't feel guilty, because there's nothing to feel guilty about. Tell me about that. Why do women, and this might be fraught territory, but why do you think you and your working mum counterparts feel the way you do?
I can't speak for everybody, obviously. This is
very diplomatically put, but that's okay. That's right.
And I think
it's only going out on YouTube. No one will know.
No one will know. It's fine. I think it's quite complex, but it really comes from what I expected I should have, probably from my childhood imaginings of what I should have been as a mother. And I think because I had a mother that didn't work, well, she did eventually when I was 12 or 13. She went back to work full time, but I was the oldest of 4 children. So for most of my young life, I didn't see her working. And when she did go back, she was working full time, but Dad was the one who had that consistent career across his lifetime. She loved her work, so it didn't seem as much like work, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, I just had that notion of I should be with my children more. Not 100% of the time. I did believe that I wanted to work. Like, that was my choice and my prerogative, and I did that. So I think it was just that I had these two things that I wanted. I wanted to be with my children because I actually enjoyed that baby era. That was really fun. But I also really enjoyed giving them to someone else to look after. And I felt a bit bad about that.
But so why feel bad about it? I mean, I get it. You know, my mother worked when we were growing up. And it's interesting, my wife, you know, she runs her own business. Yeah. She's been doing that a couple of years now. And it's interesting to see the kids get involved, because she works a lot at home, because she works with a lot of clients who are at home themselves. All of them are parents. And so it's interesting to see, and this started really during the pandemic, didn't it, right? Where a child will come up and say, "Mummy, I want a biscuit," or, you know, "Mummy, can I eat? I'm hungry," or whatever. And then they'll come on and wave, and then their kids will wave, and sometimes they participate in a conversation, like Joshy was participating in some conversation the other day. It's amazing how all that's been normalized now. I mean, that would have been totally frowned upon pre-pandemic, completely like, oh, that's outrageous, you know. So I think there's that level of flexibility that's come to it. But what I find interesting about it is that the kids will often ask their mother about the business. Like, so how does it work? Or how do you win a client? How do you help a client? Who is that guy you're working with? You know, how does that work? And, you know, they're, 11, 9, and less so the 5-year-old, 11 and 9, they're asking their mother, and they're seeing their mother do this stuff, particularly in her own business. Yeah. And it's kind of making them want to think about what that would impact for them. I think that's a really positive framework. So I go back to this question of working mother guilt, which is, well, isn't that a good thing for your kids to see?
Yeah, that's why I say it's a zero-sum game. Yeah. Like, it's not useful. Like, the guilt is not useful. I think it's just, you know, they're so attached to you, they want you for things. Yeah. So it's hard. It's just hard.
It drives my wife crazy.
And you feel like you're never quite spending all the time you want on your work, never quite spending all the time you want with your children. It's kind of, you're living this dual life.
Well, but I mean, my response to that is that there's working father guilt too, right?
Great. So I know, not that it's good, but it's a shared experience.
Well, I mean, the fact that you're happy about my guilt is a bit distressing, but okay.
Sorry, that came across in all kinds of wrong ways,
but I'm serious. Like, so my kids will say to me, I said, "Oh, you know, when Mummy goes, you guys are distressed. It's terrible. Oh my goodness, right?" I go and you're like, "Okay, we'll buy. You're flying overseas. What toys will you bring back for me?" You don't seem concerned at all. He goes, "Well, Dad, you're never here anyway, so like we're used to it, but we're not used to Mummy. We're not used to it." I'm like, what does that mean? Yeah, but look, I mean, it's the same for dads. Yeah. So I think, you know, the dad situation I think is interesting. Like, you know, I had a chat to my father about it. You know, he worked night shifts, right? Yeah. So when we were young, I never really saw him because he was asleep. Yeah. Right, he worked night shift. He ran a power station. He was the manager of the power station at night. And so he was asleep. And apparently, he told me the story, actually just last week. He told me a story that apparently when I was very young, 9 or 8 or 7, something like that, I said, Dad, I've spoken to one of my friends, his dad works in the day, and I've asked him whether he could ask his dad if he could find you a job where you could work in the daytime. But, the same, and so he said he had immense guilt about that he felt that being a night shift worker was impacting his ability to spend time with his kids. It's interesting. Right? Yeah. And then, of course, he went into his own business, and it's a whole different kettle of fish that come with that. But it's interesting. I mean, you and I, when we were talking about you coming on the show, talked a lot about this working parent thing, right? And the pressures that sort of parents face now with kids, I feel, is part of the reason why it seems, at least anecdotally, and certainly it's evidence-based from the declining birth rate that we're seeing across Western countries, that actually the push of work for both parents and careers for both parents is leading to declining birth rates in most developed countries. And you and I had a debate about that. I'm sort of keen on your views on what you think about that. Is work and the push to work longer, work differently, all the things we just talked about in your survey, is that leading to us choosing not to have children?
I think there are a few things leading to people choosing not to have children, and it's not always choosing not to have children. Sometimes it's just choosing to have them later as well.
Yeah, that's evident too, right?
Yeah.
So women are having babies later.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of factors in that. I think one of them is, in particular, women are more and more educated now, and they want to establish their careers before they,
as they should,
decide to raise a family as well. Because once you have a child, it's so much harder in those first years. Like, it becomes easier as time goes on, thank goodness. But in those early years, it's hard to change jobs and reset expectations. Like, particularly if you have a child that's not sleeping, like these kind of things affect you day to day.
Thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's chaotic. So, depending on your situation, like, you might have a blissful child that does everything perfectly, and it may be easy to change jobs.
Did you have any
months.
of those?
Not really, no.
No, I didn't either.
I'm not. It's a fiction I've heard about. So
teeth.
Oh, the teeth.
Disaster.
Oh
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's just the memories.
I can't.
It's just too hard. But anyway, but you're right. Like, so there's no blissful children, right? So, but again, if you're fortunate enough to be in a two-parent household, at least there's a bit of balance there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really great. Okay, so before I get to the other thing, I think there are other things happening now as well. The cost of living is incredible. People know how much it costs to raise a child, and I think people think about that before they have children now. And part of the reason for that is, I heard someone speaking recently about this actually, and I think it's a really nice way to frame it. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, a lot of people would finish college or university and they would get married. And it was kind of the cornerstone of starting to build your life as an adult. Whereas now, getting married, and I'm using that as the proxy for settling down and having children, which is not always the way, obviously, but it's seen as a capstone. So you've done your thing, you've built your career, you've got your life established in the way that you want, and
the way that you want, and then you partner up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that changes the way you think about things. It changes how you make decisions, because forming that family unit and having, whether you have children alone or with a partner, or whether you're married or not, it's not the cornerstone of what you do. Whereas it kind of used to be part of that cornerstone of what a successful life looks like for people.
So you're
there's
almost
so many
saying
more different ways of doing that now.
Are you saying you've kind of earned the opportunity to do that? Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, you've earned the opportunity to make a decision.
You've earned the opportunity because you've established your career to make a decision to do it or not do it.
Yeah, maybe earning is not quite the way to think about it. It's more like you're not just doing it because that's what's done in society now. I think there was a period of time, maybe more than 50 years ago, but there was a period of time that we still think of that everyone.
Well, getting married was the cornerstone, as you were
did.
saying, right?
Yeah, that's what you did. And it's not, and I'm only using getting married as kind of an old school way of thinking about it, but forming that family unit was a cornerstone rather than a capstone.
No, I agree with that. Since we're talking controversial statements I've made before, let's do it again.
Controversial.
This
is all very controversial.
Well, I know, it's controversial. I made a controversial statement that girls don't need boys anymore.
Oh, that's what they think in Korea now.
Is that what where in Korea?
There's a whole movement in Korea.
There's a whole
South
girls
Korea.
don't need boys movement in Korea.
They're rejecting. It's called the 4B movement. I can't remember all the things.
The what? The 4B movement.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
and why don't they like boys anymore in Korea?
they're basically railing against ingrained misogyny in their culture.
Yeah. Right. Well, look, fair enough, I guess. But
Yeah.
but I think my point was rather than again, this might be a male perspective on this, so let me just put that out there, right?
Okay.
But girls don't need boys anymore, or women don't need men anymore, because I get in trouble for calling women girls sometimes. Okay. So I'm not doing that. It's right. I'm being very careful here. It's all right. It's fine. She's shaking her head at me. It's fine. It's all right. I'm not going to get arrested. Because women are very educated now. They can do whatever they want. They can choose to have children by themselves. They can choose to, if they have a senior enough career or whatever, they can do whatever they want themselves. So what is the purpose of having a boy unless he adds some value to you? And I often say this to my friends, quite rightly, women's standards are very high now in terms of who they want to have as a partner, and often the man or male options don't meet the standard. And so, kind of like, well, what do you do? Is that a situation now where women no longer need boys anymore, and actually the boys aren't matching up?
That is a really good question, Jason. I do not feel qualified to answer that question.
Yeah.
I quite like my husband, so...
Well, that's good.
So, no, look, okay, so jokes aside, one thing I have actually heard recently is, I'm going to get this all wrong probably, but...
So I've already got myself into trouble several times during the show.
I feel like I have as well. So the thing I was thinking about was, someone was saying this exact thing, because basically women can have babies without having a partner and all that kind of thing. So I think, I'm not going to remember this at all. I'm probably going to forget the whole thing. I think the story was going, there were women who were freezing their eggs, I think, and they were being asked why they were doing it. And, they were getting towards this point where they were kind of going, well, I don't think I'm going to find a partner. Like, I've looked for someone, I'm not finding anyone. And they were asking, well, why? Like, what are you looking for in a partner that's making it so challenging with these hundreds and hundreds of people you've been on dates with? Like, what is it that's not meeting your expectations? And their conclusions were that the women were well educated, they were earning good money, and they were looking for someone who was a match with them. Yeah. And there weren't as many matches
at that level
as there had previously been, which is kind of what you're saying as well.
100%.
So there are lots of people who might have been a really great match in the past if they had not been earning as much. And gosh, we're in really dangerous territory here. Like, I think women have come so far in our generation, but it's not that long ago that women were not represented, and in some industries, in fact,
it's still the case.
Not represented enough.
And this is not by any means downplaying any of those issues at all.
No, absolutely not.
It is more about going back to this question of the declining birth rate. What worries me about it, and I remember you saying you were listening to a podcast recently that says actually the human population is rising.
Yes.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So I'm not suggesting we're going to get wiped out or anything. But it's clear that as we get wealthier as a society, the birth rate falls. So Korea, it's falling. Japan, it's falling. Australia, it's falling. UK, America, it's falling. As we get wealthier, and let's take it a step further, the wealthier you are in society, it seems the less likely you are to have children, which is really interesting. And that is an interesting dynamic that I think requires a lot more thinking. I don't have the answer necessarily. I think where I go to, I like talking about public policy, and I like talking about how we organize ourselves as a country and as an economy. I look at it and go, well, something is wrong with our policy settings when the people who should be prepared to have children, given their resources, are choosing not to because of cost concerns, of time concerns, of career concerns, and when people do the arithmetic on whether they should have children or not, despite potentially having the resources to do so and not doing so, is because, and they're choosing not to, tells me there's something wrong. That's really where I'm getting to in this, right? And that to me, is, as a country, is kind of worrying. I think, well, that's, how do we cope with that? How do we continue advancing ourselves as a people, as a country, or even as a world, right? If you go that far, it's an interesting debate.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting debate, and I don't think anyone really has the answer, because this declining birth rate thing is across the board as a problem.
Yeah.
If you look at the Chinese example, the Chinese had the opposite problem. The Chinese, when I was growing up in Hong Kong, the one-child policy was seen as a wonderful way of managing their population explosion, which now the Chinese population is shrinking and shrinking fast because of its population aging and the horrible results of having more boys than girls because people prioritize that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Huge challenge.
Yeah. Do you think women now in careers are finding less barriers to their growth in careers than maybe 50 years ago? Or is it still 50 years ago, surely, but even recent times? There's a lot of debate in workplaces around, are we doing enough to help highly educated women who have strong careers and strong growth in firms and strong opportunity in firms to stay in their jobs? And I'll provide the question with a little bit more context. I had a great conversation with an old senior, she's not old, a senior executive who's not with us anymore, she said two interesting things to me. She said, the first thing, which I've never forgotten, and I always tell my girls this, is women are a lot more considered when it comes to choosing to put their hand up than guys are. So women will wait till they feel like they know 80% of something, and then they'll put their hand up. This is her advice to me, not me saying this. And then they'll put their hand up and say, I'm ready for the next thing. Whereas guys will have read some book by Richard Branson or whatever and have been in the job for 15 minutes and go, right, what's next? I'm ready, man. So that was the first piece of advice, which I thought was really, really great advice. And the second thing she said, which I thought was really interesting, is that women in roles with a balance sheet or with a P&L, if they choose to go and have children, need to remain attached to their P&L, because as soon as they're not, it's really hard to get back, which I thought were two really interesting insights. And I think on the first and the second, my view, and I'm happy for you to challenge me if I'm wrong, is we've got a bit of a way to go. Is that true?
We have a way to go.
Okay, so what do we need to do?
If I knew that, I would be very wealthy, I would say. I think there's a lot that needs to happen, and it's so embedded and so systemic. I mean, some of the things I've already talked about today, it's about the narratives that we have formed in our heads based on childhood beliefs and how we grew up and how our parents grew up and put those beliefs together for us. There's just so much that needs to be done, and so much structurally and so much bias just ingrained in the work environment, in the population, that it's going to be a generational shift and generational change that starts to help shift some of these things. But that doesn't mean we don't do the work now. We still need to do the work to make it better for people, so that as new generations come into the workforce, they have some of the groundwork already done for them to be able to keep progressing that change. So I completely agree. I found it really hard to step away from my role both times when I went on mat leave. It was hard to detach structurally and physically, but also emotionally. I felt emotionally connected to it, and I wanted to stay engaged with what was going on. And a lot of people saw that as a great thing, but I kind of reflect on it and go, well, is that shouldn't I be able to go Or shouldn't anyone be able to go and spend that time getting connected with their child or with their baby as well? Like, I think that it's really complex. But yes, we need to do a whole lot more.
But my counterpoint to that is, well, aren't we already doing that? I mean, guys are taking 6 months off to go and spend time with their children while
Now they are.
Now
it's
they
great.
are. Yeah.
When I had my children, that wasn't really happening.
I took 2 weeks per child.
Yeah,
like
my husband did as well. Yeah, and it was personal leave. That's right.
Or it might have been personal, I don't know, whatever, but it was leave of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really not enough, and I think I actually love that the people coming into the workforce now, the men have an expectation that they will be present parents. And my husband does as well, and I know that you do too. Like, they have, like, a lot more people have an expectation they will be present fathers with their children and there for those early days. And actually, with my with our second child, my husband was off work for 5 months during that time. And he was able to spend that time with us as well. So that was, it was really amazing. But yeah, it's such a missed opportunity for fathers as well, not to be able to spend that time and create that bond. It's quite a sensitive time in development too.
It completely is. Again, going back to sort of the older people who've gone through their careers that, I talk to and work with, Dean Dalvalle, who's one of my senior advisors in our firm. He said to me, he goes, it's one of the most important times.
Yeah.
Sort of being a father. It's one of the most important times to be present. And you have to go to the prize givings. You've got to go to the, that's where this context came up. I was going to a prize giving. I was like, I have to cut this meeting short. I'm going to this prize giving. And you've got to do this, because if you don't, you will regret it. You will regret it. But I do go back to the question of, if we all agree that parents being present for their children is a good thing, and that will allow people to have children in the first place if they believe they can be present for their children, in addition to the resources. You said to me we need to do more work.
What more work?
What more work?
So, okay, I don't think anyone's quite got this right yet. But
so we've got paid parental leave, we've got paid parental leave, we've got flexible work hours, we've got teams, we've got, right?
Gender neutral, like.
Yep.
That's totally wrong terminology.
I didn't specify a gender. That applies to everyone.
No, it should apply to everybody. And the more that we see both
boys don't get
paid.
Men don't get paid parental leave. That's true, but women do.
So they
Government paid parental leave. Yeah.
Oh, hang on. No, they don't. Not in the same way that women do.
No, women get paid. I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure women get government-funded paid parental leave. Because remember, I'm always careful in these conversations. I'm always very careful in these conversations not to just keep within our wonderful elite
world.
bubble of white-collar world here, right? Because I'm talking about
everybody.
The whole country.
No, I agree. And I think it is great to see some of those more white-collar employers offering better parental leave opportunities for men and women. I think that's really, really good. And it should continue to the point where it is accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
And
look, I should say, like Lendlease, which is incredibly progressive on this stuff, which both of us are privileged to work for, right? It's amazing, right, and how advanced it's been. It leads the way on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, like, if you think of the bookends of this, in America, people go back to work after just 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Women go back to work 6 weeks after giving birth. Like, I was not ready. I was not physically healed at 6 weeks to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, back to work was not really great. But people are going back regardless of what physical state they're in. So that, aside from the bond that you have to create with your child or anything, like, they're going back to work really soon. And that's one bookend. And then, one developed world bookend. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Nordic countries, like, I think, is it Norway or Denmark, where parents get basically a whole year of paid leave before they have to go back. In Russia, I think if you work for the government, you get 3 years of paid, women get 3 years of paid leave. Yeah, I think Australia is kind of somewhere in between there, right? And I think we would be wise to look to some of those Nordic countries and what they've been doing, because some of those countries offer opportunities to move some of those paid days to a grandparent or to a friend or other caregiver so that you can go back to work if you wish and get somebody else to spend that time with your child rather than going into childcare. Meanwhile, they also have great childcare options as well. So I think there are lots of things that need to adjust to make life smoother for families.
Well, there's a whole other debate there then about how the resources of a country are spent properly, right?
Yeah.
So in the Nordic countries, they have used their all resources to create big sovereign wealth funds that basically allow them to provide these services, as well as have high taxes. Like, we have somehow managed to take our resources bounty and not really spend it as efficiently as we should have, and now have very high deficits and, high deficits and high debt in all states and the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
You're kind of, well, okay. And now we're in a position where service provision is costing more and more on healthcare, on NDIS, on defence, or whatever it might be, than the country is earning, which is then begs into question. And I posted something on this the other day about, since 2007, every year since 2007, our labour force productivity has fallen.
Yeah.
Every year it continues to fall.
Yeah.
And so, what does that mean? That means the unit output of each person working is lower than it was the year before. And that to me is remarkable. It's a remarkable statistic. And I'm like, well,
huge.
Why? If it's the case that people are working longer, people are choosing to work longer, and they have to financially, why is it that our unit output is falling? And it's a sort of debate that I don't think anyone's having. Anyone's having this debate.
Look, I don't have the answers to that, but I was recently looking at some data about how much Australia is investing in innovation. And when you compare the amount that Australia invests in innovation with other countries such as Canada, the UK, the US, Australia, by way of example, is investing 2.1 million per 100 jobs over a period of time. Over that same period, those other three countries, US, UK and Canada, are investing anywhere between 17 and 28 million per 100 jobs, so over the same period. So that's a big difference from 2.1 to 17, or I think it was 28 in the UK, for example. Like, that's a massive difference.
Yeah.
And if you look at Boston, just the city of Boston, which is known for its innovation, they're investing 100 million.
Per person?
I think it's per thousand jobs.
Per thousand jobs, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Proportionally. The numbers are 2 million in Australia, 10 million in Boston. Like, there's a huge amount of investment that we could make in innovation that would lead to productivity gains if we were going to be serious about.
But why then are we not doing it? Because you think about it, all politicians in state and territory, we deal with a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Innovation districts, we want to be innovative, we want jobs, we want, let's create innovation jobs. We had one recently, right? In one of the states, looking at innovation jobs. I think part of the reason I think it is you can have public funding for innovation stuff, research grants at universities, all that sort of stuff. Part of the reason I think is the tax system, right?
Yeah.
So the friends of mine who are working in this sort of startup world and have been doing stuff, they tell me things like, how we allocate equity in shares, the tax office is all over us all the time, right? How do we get more write-offs on R&D so that we don't pay massive taxes all the time? How do we make it easier to employ people, right? We employ more than 6 people, we start getting hit by payroll tax. Payroll tax, we're charging people to employ people.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I found out the other day that in France, a friend of mine works for a company that is French-based, that for each job, the government charges 100% payroll tax on top of because that's how they fund the French welfare state.
Interesting. That's
right?
a big number, isn't it?
It's a big number, and then the individual pays tax as well.
As well, yeah.
Right, and they're still in deficit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of go. So I'm with you on the let's invest in innovation thing.
Yeah. Like, those numbers might be a bit skewed. It may not account for the money that large corporates invest in innovation, for example, but still there's a big deficit. But when it comes to innovation in Australia, our culture of innovation is not quite the same as other parts of the world either. So academics in Australia are less incentivised to commercialise the work that they do. We're great at that early stage research, but taking that to the next stage is not necessarily incentivised in Australia in the same way it is in somewhere like Boston.
So how? Why?
Why? I don't know.
Well, how?
I don't know
How? What's the difference, I guess, is the question.
So look, this is quite anecdotal and from conversations I've had with academics as well.
Yeah.
But in some places in America, an academic will do some early stage research and that's all great. But they can then commercialise that and make their own gains on it, make their own profits out of a company they develop. Whereas in Australia, you can still do that, but it's kind of this, you kind of sold out, like, don't you want to just focus on the on the research? Like there's some glory to doing the research and being a great researcher.
Isn't that just a cultural thing?
Yeah, it is a cultural thing, and that's what I mean by the culture of innovation.
So what are we saying?
Australia
Australians are less
could do with some
entrepreneurial?
shifting.
Is that what we're saying?
That's quite a controversial statement because I think there have been some
whole
great
podcast
innovations
is
that have
about
come out of Australia. Oh my
controversy.
goodness, so controversial. I'm going to lie awake for weeks now thinking about all the things I might have said. Yeah, I think there are a few things, but one of the other things is, and one of the things I'm really passionate about, like let's set aside the issue of, incentivising academics to commercialise things. I think one of the things we need to do is have more partnerships between academia and big businesses, because that's where you can start to see some of that investment happening in those ideas, and those big businesses are incentivised to commercialise that stuff in different ways.
Yeah.
So I think, particularly as we move into a new era of business, like the way that businesses are changing over this next kind of decade or two is going to be really significant. And I think if we can get that partnership working better, we can do a lot of really great things to potentially boost productivity.
Well, it's interesting because it's a great segue actually into how business is changing, because that's another thing that you and I talk about a lot, right? So I had dinner with this great friend of mine the other day who built an AI business and is sort of in AI. And we were having this whole conversation around what is AI and how does it work and what will happen, and I don't pretend to understand it. But I said to him, what do you think about jobs of the future with AI? And he said, I think any job that requires thinking is in trouble. I went, it's Saturday night, that's pretty dystopian. Are you suggesting Skynet is taking over? And he's like, well, I see this stuff every day and the AI is getting better and better and better and better. And people think AI is ChatGPT.
Yeah.
That's 17, 18, 400 generations ago, right? This thing is, he even went as far as saying, the Tesla robot or the Geodynamics robot, where they've been focusing on actuators and things like that, to how to make it move. It's like, they're not too worried about that because the AI will eventually figure it out. It's just getting cleverer and cleverer. So going back to the whole question of work, do we need to worry about working anymore? Because it sounds like the AI is going to take over and we're all going to be on universal basic income.
Yeah, okay. This is really another really complex topic. I love the controversy that we
That's going to be,
right here.
we'll title this as the controversial podcast. But it's a serious thing, right? I mean, at the moment we're thinking there are drones in the sky somewhere over the US looking at things and they might be AI for all we know, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But imagine that, his statement was, any job where you have to think is in trouble.
Okay, so I get where your friend is going with that, and I think there are really dystopian views and there are really utopian views about AI.
Yeah, and you told me you were optimistic on AI, so I'm keen to hear a counterpoint.
I am optimistic on AI.
This Saturday night dinner, which I went home thinking, well, I may as well just stop now.
Yeah. Well, you could. That's one option, right? Of all the possible future scenarios, that's one option. Let's look at the others. So, if you think about it, there might be a range of options, right? Maybe this is as good as it gets and we don't progress much further than this. Maybe for some reason tomorrow some ethicist will come in and go, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Shut it down. And this is it, okay? Hopefully that's actually not the case because we need some of this technology to improve things in our world to stop climate change and to improve how we address the next wave of health issues and to improve geopolitics and to do all sorts of things. So I really hope that there is some more progression at some point. that's actually happening. So the next option is we can go with linear progression over time, and that means that it just keeps building, and at some point we have the control to stop it, but we can keep up with it. And that'll change things like how you go to the doctor and how you receive or engage with different services in life. And then there's the option of exponential growth, which is the kind of growth that humans actually can't wrap their brains around. Like, we can't cope with that. It's like being given an iPhone 35 and going, okay, figure that out.
Yeah.
You're not ready for that.
Yeah.
You can't do it. You've had the first, second, all the way up to the 16th iPhone, so you're going to be fine progressing to 35. But that would fundamentally change the way that we engage with AI. That would mean AI companions and on-demand entertainment and all those kind of things. Like, that would fundamentally change how humans and AI engage and augment their worlds. And then there's obviously the AI superintelligence, which is where you can imagine AI as this potentially benevolent being that does everything for you and everything's perfect and you get a universal basic income and life is just really great. Or maybe it becomes a malevolent being and humans are dispensable because it's going on its own trajectory and it just is focused on doing what it wants to do and we can't stop it. And both of those options are probably not great. I actually think we're going to be somewhere between 2 and 3, because I think no matter what happens in life, humans have an ingenuity in them that makes us use what's at our disposal to create new opportunities and to engage in the world and to be relevant. Like, that's one of the things that came out of the research that we were doing about why people wanted to keep working. They want to be engaged and relevant and useful and have connections with the world and with each other. So I think if you think about the human condition, I think that if we take control at this moment and start to put the guidelines and parameters in place to make AI what we want it and need it to be, then we could be in a good place. So it really is up to the people developing it and creating these things now to be able to shape it, and it's up to us to shape it in ways that are going to be useful and good for us. I also don't think that AI is going to take over all of our jobs. I think that AI will displace some jobs, but it will create many more. And if you're working with AI, you need to have the skills and experience to be able to assess the outputs that AI is giving you. You've seen it.
At the moment.
Yeah, at the moment. At the moment, it hallucinates and does all sorts of magical things. So I think, yeah, you're right.
So someone needs to audit what it does, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's right. But
so look, I want to remain optimistic, and I am going to remain optimistic. But I can see your friend's point. I think it could be a scary world, but let's not go there.
So yet. I like it. Well, I like it. Look, I would like that view, but my worry with it is that I think traditionally we have been incredibly stupid on some public policy frameworks and legislative frameworks and regulatory frameworks with this type of stuff. And so we are relying on people to not be silly in developing this technology, that it will be used for good rather than evil. And that to me is the fundamental question. Most of us don't understand this stuff. We're not working on it every day. We're starting to see elements of it come out. And people are starting to worry about what jobs it might replace or whatever. Like it might well be, for example, an AI healthcare will be much better than a doctor, because the AI will tell you exactly what's wrong with you and fix it one day, right? That might happen, right? Who knows? Like there's all this scenario analysis going on about where it might be able to be used. Will lawyers be required anymore because the AI might just interpret the law and say this is the answer? Of course, that's not how the law works. The law is a creation of human beings. That there are lots of sort of holes and opportunities and differences and different interpretations of it, and all of that's done in a human standpoint. Although I am reading a sci-fi book that somebody gave me the other day where the guy had an AI trial and it was done in 15 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, and of course he was conscripted into the military and is now fighting a battle somewhere, and in space, right? But an interesting concept, right? An interesting concept, because he was imprisoned, and the robot that imprisoned him told him that, took him to a iPad-like thing, and it said, would you like a human trial or an AI trial? It's a 17-month wait for a human trial, but you can have your AI trial right now. And he said, well, so I'd be in prison for 17 months before I could get a human trial. He pressed the AI trial, and the government at that time had sent a military conscription unit in, and anyone who was convicted was conscripted into the military. That's a dystopian view.
Yeah.
So you kind of go, but having said that, in that world, human beings were enabling that to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you go to sci-fi generally, like the Terminator film, I think, which is a 1980s film, the whole idea of Skynet was an AI that was trying to be benevolent. It was trying to stop humanity from destroying itself, except humans didn't want to live under tyranny, right? And therefore, it sort of responded against it. So I find that whole area needs a lot more discussion and a lot more kind of investigation into it. But I do think there is cause for optimism as well, in the sense that, well, we've gone straight down the is it going to kill us or not thing, and that's where everybody goes. But in the workplace, it also changes things, right? So how do corporates start implementing this technology to become more productive? How do we look at, we're in a company that designs and builds beautiful, cities and infrastructure. I mean, how do we simulate that and develop it? How does the AI start to come into all of that? I think that's a wonderful thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to develop better cities that solve problems a lot faster. So I think there's that side of things. But I am finding in this whole AI debate that people are worried about the dystopian view. Right?
They are, yeah. And it's really scary. The dystopian view it seems realistic enough for people to be very scared about it.
Well, I think so. Well, because it's did anyone really believe 20 years ago that we'd have a computer and all of us would have a computer, right?
Yeah.
And you've got the watch. I don't wear watches, but yeah, you've got a watch and you can do the same thing. If you read sort of sci-fi from 20 years ago, people had let's look at Star Trek, like the Next Generation, right?
Tell me all
so
about
Star Trek, The Next Generation, there you go. It was, 1990s? Everybody walked around with sort of a pad, and they could sort of write on the pad, and they would like touch screens and press buttons, and it was all electronic. The iPad didn't exist then. Touchscreen didn't exist then.
Yeah.
Right? And that was a simulation of, they must have looked into it and decided that's what the future will look like. But that's how, and now we do it. Like, that's what we have now.
Yeah.
And, so I think there's a lot to say sort of around AI. Maybe we should continue the conversation, right, around AI one day, because I think there's a lot there. And I think one of the areas that would be cool to explore, is what does it mean in the workplace? Going right back to the beginning. If we are working longer, and your view is that AI will create new jobs and augment the ones we have, then what does that actually look like? And actually, while we're on the topic, a part of the thing that worries me is that AI replaces a lot of the things we ask young people to do.
Yeah.
We ask them to go do the research. We ask them to go do the prep work. We ask them to pull the slides together. We ask them to learn from us as sort of older people. Yes, it's true that we are slightly older now than we once were. See the lights of the AIs turn the lights off.
Yeah.
Look at that.
There's a button in the corner.
There you go, button in the corner. AI has replaced those jobs already.
Yeah.
So how do young people learn?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the big challenges.
There you go, the light is back. Yeah. The optimism is back.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That could have happened at a really amazing time.
It was just right. We were just talking about the dystopia of AI, and the lights went out.
Yeah. Scary. So I think that has been one of the challenges over the last few years, hasn't it? The fact that even in terms of not being in the office as much,
the pandemic,
young people not learning in the same ways.
The pandemic hurt young people in a big way, right?
Absolutely.
And, I had lots of conversations with people saying, the partners of firms were at home in their beautiful houses with a beautifully set up study and the ergonomic desk and whatever else, and the kids were all at the office sort of waiting for instructions.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, right, and that's obviously not viable.
Yeah.
That's obviously not viable.
And one of the things that came out of the research we were doing is the importance of lifelong learning and the evergreen career.
So, you mentioned the evergreen thing. Tell me about the evergreen thing.
So this is really about, if you're going to be working that long, the current generation, Gen Zs are expected to have 18 jobs and 6 distinct careers across their lifetimes. So that's a lot of change.
6?
6,
okay.
Yeah. And with that amount of change, the imperative to continuously upskill is really important. So this idea of having an evergreen career where you are able to upskill regularly and continuously throughout your life so that you remain at the forefront of things that are changing rapidly, like AI, which we've spoken extensively about, but also a bunch of other things as well. So that you're ready to face into all of those new careers and possibilities that come up. Because one of the biggest hallmarks of the next decades is going to be the pace of change. We've been saying this forever, right?
Yeah.
But it still remains relevant. The pace of change is going to continue to accelerate.
Well, I would say it's the acceleration is speeding up, if that's a thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And the half-life of a university degree is only 2 to 5 years now. In the past, it used to be, 10, 15.
I wish I didn't do so many damn degrees. I didn't need them, honestly. Yeah.
I mean, you could have just staggered them throughout your life.
Probably.
And you would have a bit more of a half-life.
Has anyone ever asked you what your university degree is? No one asks me.
People do, yeah. People ask me all the time. Maybe it's because...
I guess they assume that I didn't go to university. Who knows?
Or maybe they assume you did. And they're like, well, what did you do, Alice?
What did you do? Maybe.
How did you get there?
I just want to ask you very quickly, before our battery dies, around if it's the case, we're in this evergreen career. Is there a future for office?
Everyone asks that.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So at the moment, we believe that there is a future for office. We also believe that that future is about really great office product, places that people want to be because they make people feel positive and amazing, and they have all of the amenity and all the things that make life more convenient for you.
Yeah.
And that also enable organisations to use that place as a competitive advantage for their organisation, whether that's because it's a great place to be, so it brings people together to collaborate and innovate, or whether it's because it really demonstrates their brand so that the customers can engage with it better. We believe there is a future for office, and we believe that there is going to be a higher requirement for office space in the future, based on data that we have access to, but also because we can see the increase in jobs that are going to come from advances in technologies that are happening and how they're being implemented into organisations. We also think that those offices are going to be part of mixed-use environments.
Yeah. It's not just going to be an office, it's going to be a place where you can actually live your life properly.
That's right. And the more that we blend these things together and ensure that they are integrated, the better future we're going to have for the way that we live and work and raise our children and look after our old people. It's really important that we think about life holistically, not just as the office CBD and the home and the hospital location. And we need to really think in a sophisticated way about all of those things. And we need to do it by upcycling existing things that we have as well.
Not just building new things. And we talk a lot. Can you come back on the show and we'll talk a bit more about that? Because I think it'd be really cool to talk about the future of office and the upcycle element to it.
There's so much in that.
There's so much. And we can talk for hours.
Yeah.
And as I said, I always love talking to you, Alice. And
Me too.
It's really great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks for coming on. And that's our show for today, everyone. Thanks very much for listening. You can catch the show on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you on the next one.